We're talking about your company's founded in Chile and you're looking to come up with some sort of a playbook for how to expand into the US. And I think it's a fascinating topic. So we're going to approach it from several angles. But I wanted to start on a personal note because Chile is a place that's very special to me. And I'll try to do it in my best Spanish if I can. So Chile es un lugar muy especial para mí. Lo visité en 2013 y disfruté cada momento. Aquí estoy en una viña en el Valle de Casablanca, entre Santiago y Valparaíso, y espero volver algún día. Eh, También he estado trabajando con startups chilenas. Esta es mi clienta, la fundadora y directora ejecutiva de MDI Care. Su empresa ha desarrollado una aplicación móvil que puede ayudar a las clínicas oftalmológicas con financiación insuficiente a detectar mejor el cáncer ocular en niños. Y juntos preparamos la presentación para apoyar su próxima ronda de financiación. That's about all the Spanish I'm going to speak today, but hopefully I've shown you that Chile is a special place for me. I'm Italian national, so I speak Italian, which helps me with my pronunciation in Spanish. But anyway, let's talk a little bit more about your market. The objectives really for today, I want to help you identify some of the nuances of entering the US market, and then also provide some insight, but really some actionable recommendations and resources. So not just the theory, but practical next steps. What can you do to get started? So these are the two objectives, and we're going to divide this into three steps. The first is align. We want to align our mindset and really make sure that we're thinking in the right way about this expansion. From there, adapt. How do we take what we've done in Chile, adapt it to the US market for maximum probability of success? And finally, accelerate. So once we've figured out what works, how do we add some gasoline, some fuel, some electricity to make it move faster? So these are the three segments of today's discussion, and we'll start with aligning the mindset for U.S. entry. I think this word right here is so important, the mindset, because we're all experts. You all have many years of experience. You have vision. You are founding companies that have a real vision for the future. It's really not a question of can you compete? I believe you can compete. I believe you have something unique to offer, but it's a question of how can you adapt your way of doing business? And it starts with this mindset. So the first and most important thing to understand is that the US is not one single market. It's 50 states, as you know, and these states are very unique. They include major metropolitan areas: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Seattle, Denver, Dallas. These cities are all enormous markets. It's like having a Santiago in every state, right? And they all have their own local culture. And so it's important to understand that these are micro markets, each with their own rules. Their customers behave differently. They have different costs of entry. And so you want to think regionally first, not nationally. Think regionally first and choose that beachhead, that one small subsection of the US market where you can win. It might be a particular geography. It might be a regional geography but with a specific customer segment. And you want to choose the ones that have the right regulations, the right type of customer. Where can you find the density of your customer, and an achievable entry cost to maximize your odds of success? And one of the best ways to do this really is to work with local advisors and partners, people who understand that specific beachhead market, so that you have a head start before committing these resources, as scaling up to a larger geography, including nationwide. So always keep this in mind. These are micro markets. Now, The next most important thing to remember is the expectations of the US customer. Customer service, we all know what that function provides, but customer service really is a part of the product. So there's no such thing as having a good product and bad customer service, or a bad product and good customer service. They are part of the same thing, and speed and responsiveness are really critical here. And the reason for that is because of alternatives. Every customer that is out there who could spend money on your product has many, many alternatives. And the one thing we all have the same amount of is time. So if it takes too much time to answer a question, to resolve a concern, to file a ticket, if that takes too much time, well, that becomes part of the cost. And maybe your price advantage disappears because the customer thinks, well, I maybe didn't have to spend much up front, but now I'm spending all this time. So I would urge you to set a 24-hour maximum turnaround whenever an inbound request comes in, a question about the product, a request for a proposal. Just get in the habit of answering quickly. And you can create templates, you can set up alerts so that you can be responsive and do so efficiently without sacrificing quality. You don't need a huge customer service team, you just need this mindset. We'll talk later on in a moment. I have a great book recommendation for you about the customer orientation of successful US startups. But let's keep moving on. I also want to spend a little time talking about competition because the US is such an active marketplace, both B2B and B2C. There are a lot of other players. So your business may be differentiated, your product may be unique, but in the customer's eye, there might be a dozen other companies competing with you, offering something similar. Now, you can spend time educating them on why you're different, and that's important, but that's also expensive. It takes time, it takes budget in the form of media exposure. And so remember that buyers have no shortage of options. This is part of the reason why customer service is so expensive, because it's very easy to drop one option and move on to the next option when there is no shortage of options. So you can't be everything to everyone. You need to carve out very clear, differentiated value proposition, but it's not enough for it to be the same value proposition that works in Chile. It has to be based on what you're observing in the US market. So differentiate with focus. Find that narrow space that you can own rather than choose a big addressable market where you can be number 2 or number 5 or number 10. Try to be number 1 and define that in some specific way. A niche in the market that's underserved. Perhaps all of the products in your competitive set all have the same features, but you have some feature that is different, that goes above and beyond. And really, you want to monitor these competitors because, especially now, new ones are appearing in the US landscape every day. I am also a founder just like you. I spend a lot of time looking at competitors, and what I thought in my spreadsheet, what I thought would be a half dozen or a dozen, that list grows every week. I keep on finding new companies that are doing what my company does. And so it's really important to stay clued in and to stay educated on what they're doing so that we can all respond by saying we're faster, we're better, we're more relevant. We have some sort of advantage. The last thing from a mindset point of view that I want to remind you is that your credibility starts from zero. Now, this is not a criticism of you as a founder, of your product, your company. It's simply that by entering the US market, it's a reset, right? So you may have very strong credentials at home, but to the US buyer, they're basically going to say, show me what you've done here. Show me what you've done in this context. It's great that you are the #1 brand in your category in Chile, or it's great that you have raised a round of funding, across Latin America, but show me what you're doing here in the United States. We need to see proof that it works in this market with these dynamics, with these expectations. And so always remember, stay humble. Your trust is earned. It takes a long time to earn the trust. That trust can be lost very quickly, but it's never going to be assumed. So when you think about landing and expanding here in the United States, once you've chosen that beachhead, find a partner who's willing to pilot your product. And maybe you give them favorable pricing. Maybe you write the contract so that they will include, as part of their agreement, they will include a testimonial, a quote, a case study. Maybe they join you on stage at a conference, something that allows you to take this successful pilot and this successful engagement and show the world, not only are we one of the best companies in Chile in this category, but now we're showing that it works in the US too. Now, today's conversation is not just theory. I want to make sure that I give you some resources that are useful as well. So I want you to remember a few things. There is no one America. We're talking about, 50 states, 50 markets, all including a wide range of demographics, preferences, and customer behaviors. And so what I recommend you do is just get familiar with the data. Pew Research Center has a lot of good data on attitudes, trends, opinions within the United States. And so you can get data sets that show you this is how a customer on the East Coast thinks differently than in the Midwest or the South or out West. And those that can be very useful in finding proof points for investors, for your own planning. I also urge you to look at Hofstede Insights. These are developmental and organizational psychologists who have done a lot of research into how American business culture compares to other parts of the world. And so you'll be able to use real data to draw some conclusions about how your message might need to adapt. So this is very important. Now, some of this research should be experiential, where instead of finding a study online, I urge you to go out into your market and experience it firsthand. For example, you'll start to see that what might be a certain expectation of formality in business culture in other parts of the world, in the US, is very casual, very direct. We address even our senior leaders by their first name. We, for the most part, no longer have to wear formal attire in a business setting. Now, this is happening globally, but it's especially true in the US, where there's a more casual directness in how we relate to one another in a business environment. Remember that the US is also highly individualistic. And so compared to other cultures in Europe, for example, you don't find people that are looking for their own personal success. But in the United States, when you find a potential customer, you're not only thinking about solving their problem and how to make their investment generate a positive return. You should also think about that individual and what are they trying to do in their career? They're probably trying to get promoted. They're probably thinking about their own personal brand. And so this is a new way of thinking. Help that person get promoted. Help them build their brand. Help them be seen as a leader in their own organization because they are also on an individual mission for themselves. Regionality, I've spoken about this, and this is important. Now, I want to call your attention to Meetup. Meetup is not only American, but meetup.com is a great way to find local in-person events related to your category. So if you are in fintech or you are in enterprise B2B software, you can look for events in a particular city, and you can start to go and interact with people specifically in those categories So you're talking about the same things, but you get to observe them in person. And I promise you, you'll start to see things which will help you understand these cultural nuances better. Finally, service excellence. So earlier I spoke about how important it is to adopt this mindset. If there is one book that I recommend, it's by Tony Hsieh, the founder of Zappos. Zappos eventually was acquired by Amazon, but part of what made this startup so successful years ago was their obsession with customer service and their obsession with making the customer happy, starting with an understanding of what makes them happy in the first place, and then delivering the best possible experience every chance they got. I highly recommend this book. It's sort of a Bible for customer service people in the United States. Okay, so that's our first section. I ordinarily would stop here, but we've got a lot to cover, and I will leave time at the end for questions. So let's move on to the second part, where we adapt to the US market. So in the first section, we shifted our mindset. We gave some thought to how people think differently. We're starting to respond to that different way of thinking. And now we're going to adapt and build on what we learned. So you have an ICP, you have your customer personas because you've been doing business in Chile and maybe the rest of Latin America. So there's no need to start from scratch. You just want to revalidate them because the customer profile that worked in your home market won't always translate directly. You can't make the same assumptions about their needs or their budgets or how they make decisions. You'll have to learn that all over again. And that means do a lot of testing. So start with discovery calls. Get in front of a customer. And if it's not a perfect fit, no problem. Start with, as close a fit as you can find. Ask them questions. Try to ask them the same questions every time so you can start to find patterns in how they respond, what they value, what they prioritize. And you'll be able to see very quickly how this compares to what you see back home in Chile. Now, you'll take that feedback and that will help you understand, do we need to use messaging a little differently? Maybe we have to change our pricing strategy or how we articulate the value of our product. And this can also be tested with paid ads. So a lot of times I'll work with clients and we will do small campaigns with a low budget specifically to understand simply how many clicks the ad gets. Because if you show 3 ads and they all get thousands of impressions and they all have different levels of click-through rates, that's a great way to have some initial data to validate some of your hypotheses. There are other ways to get this data, but this is an easy one, very quick. As you know, digital media is very quick and responsive. So this is a good way to start revalidating your ICP and your personas. From there, do some more research on the competition, right? I think of it as spy before you sprint. So maybe start with 3. Your buyers are constantly going to be comparing options. So think about 3 competitors that they're likely to be looking at while they're looking at you. Look at how they're messaging. And I'm not recommending that you just copy their messaging, but you can analyze it and understand, are they leaving a vacuum? Is there perhaps some space that is uncovered that you can step in to fill? And you can even go further and understand, what are their go-to-market channels? So if it's a busy space, but nobody is actively engaging customers on LinkedIn, then that could be an area where you can get extra efficient outreach opportunities. So really think about not just their messaging, but their entire go-to-market strategy to inform your own approach. Pricing will be a factor here, and it can be really challenging because you may not have the data and you may not have the time to do a full analysis of pricing. But you know that the expectations are going to be different. You know they have many alternatives. And so rather than make assumptions based on what worked in Chile, think about what you've learned and apply context. Wherever possible, price with your value first. Because when you price on features, when you price on some objective measure of your product, your customers have the ability to just compare you to your competition, and then they're just going to look for the lowest price. But you may not want that. You might be a premium product. You might offer something that is very different. And so we call this value-based selling, where you can distance yourself. You might have additional partnerships where by association with a local brand, that might give you more credibility and influence. And that might allow you to price higher and drive a higher margin. Now, a lot of industries will vary based on how easy it is to find pricing information, but generally speaking, you'll get a sense of where you belong in that spectrum. And of course, once you set prices, it can be challenging to change them. So always keep that in mind. Now, the last piece in this section is really about the regulatory landscape, because it's well known that innovation is rewarded in the US market. And we love new ideas here. We love new products, exciting new experiences, but it's also one of the strictest regulatory frameworks for companies to come in and do business. So it's not just about checking a box. You need to think about how this informs your overall go-to-market strategy. Whatever you do at a country level, you will likely have to give some thought to the state level laws and regulations to follow. Now, a lot of companies choose the state of Delaware, which is close to Washington, D.C. They'll incorporate in Delaware because of favorable tax and regulatory requirements. But there are industry-specific rules as well. It's not just about your geography. So you need to understand those barriers, and I'll show you a few resources you can use for this. But you also want to think about how this affects your go-to-market and especially your marketing, because as soon as you start sending a message out to your customers about what you stand for, you have to be very careful about the claims that you make. And this varies, of course, by industry. So let's talk about some resources that can help you with all of this. On the legal side, I just want to remind you that there are so many different aspects, and this is probably similar to what you found in Chile. You have to think about the type of business entity that you form, how you approach licensing, how you approach labor and employment to hire people, taxes, consumer protections, and increasingly data privacy and security. So I've given you a few links here, and when we share the slides, you'll be able to click through to these links. These are, the first two are federal, United States level resources for how to navigate a lot of these different concerns. It's going to be specific to your business, your industry, and so I can't go into any detail in this conversation other than to say that you can use these resources specifically for your company. The third example is at a state level. Once you've chosen where you want to set up a business entity, then you can also look at more detailed compliance within those state frameworks. Now that covers the legal side. On the tax side, there are a few other resources I'm sharing here. Free mentorship, tax guidance for foreign companies from the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, which is our federal organization overseeing all tax matters. And then that last example, again, state by state, once you have a better sense of the geography that you want to enter. The other thing I want to point out, we've talked a lot about generating data and creating hypotheses to validate. Now, blind spots are a fact of life. And I think this is true in any business context, not just expanding into the US, but it's especially true in an unfamiliar business culture. So sometimes it feels like you're a ship out at sea and the waves are choppy and the weather is unpredictable and we don't know what's waiting for us. And this is very, very typical. But the good news is that a lot has changed, and especially in the ability to source data to mitigate that risk. So blind spots are a fact of life, but the research to navigate around those blind spots has never been cheaper, faster, or more effective. And so this is a lot of the work that I do with Mission Flywheel is market research. Imagine if you could find a sample of 1,000 customers who are in market for your product, and we go and give them a survey that they see on their mobile app. And starting as little as 95 cents per response, we can ask them all kinds of questions about what is their role in the organization, what are their priorities when they're looking to invest in a product like yours, what are the features they want, who have they already worked with, were they happy, were they not happy, and why. You can get so much information from these surveys and then digest the results in order to prioritize the pain points that matter the most. So once we understand what they value and where they have problems, we can now use that data to inform our marketing communications, write better ads, make better content, add better features, and have better sales meetings so that we can close deals faster. That's what it's all about. And so a lot of the work that I've done with clients, just like you, is really helping them enter new markets by understanding the dynamics that affect these customers. So this is something I'm always happy to talk about in more detail. I don't want to, spend too much time on it now, but I'm always happy to spend more time. Now I want to move on to the third and final part, which is now that we understand the mindset we need to be in, and we take the plan that was born in Chile and make some changes, some modifications. Now we have that US go-to-market plan, and it's time to accelerate. So how do we think about accelerating it? Well, even the best product can fail if that message doesn't resonate with your local buyer, right? So they expect to hear how the solution impacts their specific challenges. Now, if you've spent time doing those discovery calls, you've done some research, you've tested the market, these are ways that you have a better sense of their challenges, and you can now frame your product's value in the context of what they need. It's not just about translation, right? It's really about building trust. And so you want to speak their language, translate your value proposition into buyer outcomes. So not just this is our product, not our product can do this for you, but even more, this is what you will feel. This is what you will experience. These are the benefits you will see. This is the return on investment that you will get from being in business with us. So I hope everyone sees the difference there. It's very important in this market. And again, the paid ads can be very helpful in testing those headlines just to see what message is the most meaningful to this buyer. Now, your channel mix, the different channels in which you can get the message out. You have so many options. It's like going to a vending machine and seeing 30 different candy bars. How do you choose which one? Well, not every channel has the same audience or gives you the same ability to communicate or delivers the same return. But this is where, if you've done some research, you can also think about applying it to specific channels. So for example, if you're in a B2B business and you've learned that your customer has a specific pain point, you can create content specifically for LinkedIn where you know that it's very easy to engage a B2B audience. Now, if your product instead is a very visual product and is very captivating in terms of how its visual appeal will resonate with the end user, then you might use a platform like Instagram, and it might have a very different strategy. But you want to think about where are they engaging, And so all of this requires a little bit of research and testing and iteration. Remember that things move fast until they become really slow. Now, what do I mean by that? Qualification is typically very quick because the US customer is very savvy, very adept at using information to educate themselves. So it's quite common. I work with a lot of sales teams. I've been a sales leader throughout my career. One of the things that we've had to learn in this culture is that your customer will often show up to the meeting knowing as much about your product as you do, sometimes even more. It's amazing how much information they have. And if they're smart about their own purchase, they will do that homework. They will do that research and qualify very quickly because they know they can very quickly get pricing information and feature comparisons. They can look at reviews to quickly understand if there are 10 companies in this category and I want to pick between, I want two or three to take the meeting. Well, they can qualify very quickly. But then at some point, when they decide that they like you, it can take a very long time. And why is that? Well, increasingly, there is what we call the multi-threaded sales process, where the first person you speak to probably won't be the last because we have to get different departments involved in the purchase. This is a lot more common in the United States than in other markets where it's not enough to have a single buyer, but you have influencers that are basically selling internally on your behalf. And then you have the procurement team, which is going to negotiate on pricing. And then you have the finance team, which wants to make sure that you can guarantee good results. And then the legal team looks at your contract and says, we have 20 changes we want to make before we'll sign. So you can imagine it becomes a very long process. And so just prepare for a marathon. Understand that you're going to have a qualification framework that is based on who is the budget holder? How do they make decisions? Who has the authority to make the final signature? How long will it take? And if it takes 3 months or 6 months, can you do anything to improve that time frame so that you can accelerate that process wherever possible? Executive sponsorship is a very important aspect of this, where you can simply move deals faster by finding that most senior buyer. Maybe not the person that shows up to every meeting, but the person who eventually will say, I'm the boss. I'm going to help you get this done. And then they turn around and they tell their teams how to proceed. So this is really an important part of building momentum. Now, one of the ways to make things move faster is through partnerships. So if you're a company coming in from Chile and no one is familiar with your name, you may have a great product, but if no one knows you, it takes a long time to establish a presence. But with partnerships, you can get there faster. So maybe you find a channel partner that already has trust with your customer, and maybe they sell something different, a complementary product or service where they can co-market with you. You work together and you're not in competition, but you share the benefits. Maybe it's a revenue share, maybe there are other ways of negotiating value, but ultimately those partnerships can really be the difference between entering the US market successfully or taking an eternity to establish a foothold. So I want to put things in more of an actionable context here based on what we've learned. And that means sort of a roadmap here. So if you did make the decision today to enter the US market, think of it in these terms. The first 30 to 60 days, you're taking that ideal customer profile that has worked in Chile and you're adapting it. You're going to validate what works here in the US, what needs to change, find some new ways to create messaging that explains your value proposition to a new audience, take some meetings, listen to what the buyers are saying, and really learn to adapt. give yourself 30 to 60 days to do all of that. And don't cut corners because everything that follows is built on this. But from there, you have the ability to take your go-to-market playbook and start to adapt it. So you'll have your playbook that worked in Chile, and you'll have a version of that that you use for the US. You'll use that to help you localize your assets, maybe new collateral, new messaging in your ads, new content for social media and the blog, whatever it might be. And then also build on your momentum with customer prospects and partner prospects, whatever it takes to get that first pilot. So let's say after 120 days, you have that first pilot. Of course, your product needs to perform. And don't forget how important it is to deliver good service after the signature on the contract. But in those 6 to 12 months, hopefully you will have a chance to understand which channels are best for acquisition of new customers. What's giving you the best meetings and the most meetings? Where can you manage your cost, whether it's time or media budget or whatever it may be? And this might be where you start to make investments in support, growing your team, growing your partnerships, and just building a bigger footprint. So by 12 months, this is very achievable. And then in the second year, you start thinking, okay, what worked for our beachhead market, that one customer segment in that one part of the United States, what have we learned? What new research have we done? How can we apply this to now scale, build that broader US presence? So this is what we call in the US land and expand. And it's really quite simple. But there's something important that's happening throughout this process, which is that you as founders are going to be really on the front lines. And you're going to be out there selling your product. You're going to be out there talking to customers. And you're doing it in a culture that's less familiar to you than the culture in Chile that you come from. And so think about intercultural sales mastery. How do you really drive the relationship building process in a way that your customer feels that you are there for them? You're not some company with an unproven product from a faraway land, but you are in the US here to solve their problems. And the fact that your company was founded in Santiago or wherever it may be doesn't even matter. That's if you're successful with intercultural sales mastery, that's the effect that you can look forward to. And I've got a unique perspective on this because I'm founding a company right now that is really focused on exactly this. So I'll frame this in terms of the problem and the outcome, like I've advised you to do, and then we'll talk a little bit about the solution. So think about the problem. Founder-led sales is not easy. You're doing a lot of other things. You're not a full-time salesperson. You are a full-time salesperson plus a founder. You're doing investor relations. You're building your team. You're building your product. You have to manage all of the moving parts. You have to stay profitable or at least show that you can manage your cash flow. This is hard work. And so taking all of that and now adding an intercultural layer is even harder. But what would it look like to achieve real intercultural sales mastery? So now you're having effective buyer conversations that are totally in alignment with the culture. Doesn't matter that you come from Chile. Doesn't matter that you are not a native speaker of English. What culturally aligned conversations look like is that customer meets with you and they know and they trust that you understand their problem, that your product has something unique and interesting to offer. And if you can get this message across to them, you're going to have shorter sales cycles, which helps your cash flow. You're going to speed up your entry into the US market. Your investors will love that. And you will give yourself more runway because you'll be winning more customers in this important market. So how do we approach that? My company, Atlas Primer, has a solution for this. We have an app that allows people to practice these conversations. So imagine a simulation of a US buyer relationship. It's all powered by AI. It allows you to practice in a safe place before going into the meeting. And that's great for people who maybe are less comfortable presenting in English or who are meeting American customers for the first time, because now you can refine your pitch. You can become more fluent, more confident. Confidence is so important because they expect to see you confidently represent your product. You'll be able to hear real objections, and you'll hear them in the language that the customer uses. And if they like what they're hearing, they'll share that feedback as well. So all of these are great ways to accelerate learning with repetition because you can practice anytime. You don't have to wait for those rare opportunities when a customer grants you a little bit of their time. You can do this in a safe place. So this is the app. Like I said, it's called Atlas Primer. We believe that every closed deal starts with a meaningful conversation. And actually, I want to show you a very quick example. And after I'm done, I'm going to also give you a code that you can use it for yourself. Okay, can everybody see the black screen? I'll assume you can see it. If not, please stop me. So we have the ability to create custom scenarios. I'm going to skip that for today, and I'm just going to show you what a sales call looks like. So we have this character. She is a fictitious person. She's not real, but very similar to the type of customer that you might meet. So here's a little bit about her personality, a little bit about her professional background, and these are our goals. We're trying to act like a sales representative doing a cold call. And we want to introduce ourselves and the company, explain the product, but make sure we identify her pain points before we present the solution. So I'm going to do a very quick demo for you to show you how it works.
You have my attention. What do you have for me today?
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for taking time to meet today. I have a very interesting app which I believe will improve your team's productivity and business outcomes by 30%.
I appreciate your confidence, but you'll need to be more specific. How does your app work? And in what ways does it directly contribute to a 30% productivity boost? Let's talk specifics.
Absolutely. Let me start with one question. Do you ever have problems in meetings where no one is clear on action items and next steps?
I wouldn't say it's a common problem. Listening. How does your app address this specifically? And what kind of impact have you seen in other companies?
We find that everybody has some problem with this, and it can affect revenue. The way our app works is by consolidating text from Slack and WhatsApp and email and Zoom, all of the systems you're using, and unifying the transcripts from your internal meetings to make sure that everybody understands what was discussed, what are the action items, and who is responsible for each. With one customer, we generated a 29% return on investment simply by implementing this over a 90-day period.
I see the concept. Centralizing communication could indeed improve clarity, but I'm curious, what's the learning curve for my team, and how does it integrate with our existing tools? The ROI is promising, but I need to know more about the practical implementation.
I'm going to stop here. I think you understand how this works now. And I just want to show you the kind of feedback you get after a simulation like this. So while it's generating the feedback, you can see that I'm given a score. So I did a 6 out of 10. I did some things right, but I could have done other things better. I should have provided a more concise and tailored introduction to capture her interest quickly. The next time I practice, I'm going to keep that in mind. Here are some strengths as well as some areas for improvement. And I even have some insight into the tone that I want to use. So if the American customer has a higher expectation of confidence or enthusiasm or assertiveness, this allows me to very quickly see, am I doing enough to promote that type of relationship? And in this case, the answer is probably no. So at this point, I'm going to go back to my slides because I want to share with you, everybody can have access via this link. And if you use the code VIP trial, you'll have access to the full product for an entire month. And this is a great way to practice your pitches while you're planning your entry into the US market. So hopefully this is useful to you. And that is all the slides I have for today. So I know I've done a lot of talking and I'm interested to hear if anybody has questions.